My topic was gender issues, and instead of starting at 1865, I had to start at 1848 because that was when the first major event was. Oh shoot. So I'm starting with women's rights just in general and how they were viewed. So in the 19th century, the culture of women was significantly different from that today. Their authorities in the house were severely less than seen today. Women weren't allowed to show any desire of independence or power, and they could not make any of their own choices. Catherine Beecher is that one right there. She was a kindergarten teacher during the 19th century and was known for her views on women's rights. And I have an excerpt from her, The Limits of Sisterhood, and it says, "Woman is to win everything by peace and love, by making herself so much respected, esteemed, and loved, that to yield to her opinions and to gratify her wishes will be that free will offering of the heart. But the moment woman begins to feel the promptings of ambition or the thirst for power, her aegis of defense is gone. All the sacred protection of religion, all the generous promptings of chivalry, all the poetry of romantic gallantry depend upon a woman's retaining her place as dependent and defenseless, and making no claims and maintaining no right but what the gifts of honor, rectitude, and love." So basically, Catherine Beecher, who was a woman, obviously, knew that women weren't allowed to have as many rights as women and couldn't have their own thoughts or their own ideas about politics and their rights. And because of the limited rights, women decided to try and get them back, or try and gain them, which was the next slide. So this is women in politics. Because of the lack of rights that they had, women like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony set out to gain political rights for everyone. They formed the Women's Loyal National League in 1863, which started a petition to abolish slavery. And when the 13th Amendment was formed, this was a victory for the abolitionists because slavery was ended. But it was also a victory for the Women's Loyal National League because it showed their capability to induce great change. And so the Women's Rights Convention in May of 1866, Elizabeth Cady Stanton suggested equal rights for all, and this showed the ultimate goal for her organization, which was universal suffrage. And I have another quote from Susan B. Anthony when she was addressing Congress. She said, "It was we, the people, not we, the white male citizens, nor yet we, the male citizens, but we, the whole people, who formed this union. And we formed it not to give the blessings of liberty, but to secure them, not to the half of ourselves and the half of our prosperity, but to the whole people, women as well as men. And it was downright mockery to talk to the women of their enjoyment of the blessings of liberty, while they denied the use of the only means of securing them provided by this democratic republic government, the ballot." So Susan B. Anthony was saying that if we all form this country together and this union together, then we should all get the rights that came with it. And so a timeline of what happened was in 1848, the first Women's Rights Convention was held in New York. 68 women and 32 men signed the Declaration of Sentiments, which displayed their beliefs and goals for the future conventions. Then in 1850, the first National Women's Rights Conventions were held in Worcester, Massachusetts, and more than 1,000 people attended, and this would become an annual convention for the next 10 years. Then in 1869, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth C. Stanton formed the National Women's Suffrage Association, while Lucy Stone and Henry Blackwell formed the American Women's Suffrage Association, and they both aimed to gain voting rights for women. And also in 1869, Colorado gained women's suffrage. And then in 1890, the two associations that those people formed merged to form the National American Women's Suffrage Association, and they went to state by state with campaigns to gain voting rights. And then in 1893, women's suffrage began in Colorado, and this sparked the rest of the states to allow suffrage. This is a map of when each state gained women's suffrage. So there's the first one, Wyoming, and then Colorado was the next one. And the states that are magenta, green, and blue had not yet had women's suffrage in 1919, but a year later, the 19th Amendment, women's suffrage was national law.
It was interesting. Can you go back, Mike?
I'll try. Yeah.
Yeah, I just pressed like twice.
Oh.
Or, yeah, there you go.
No.
Oh.
Well, it's in looking at that map and looking at the states and thinking about where women's rights are and what state, some that would have in local elections, the map showed local elections where they allowed it, like in Florida and Louisiana, I think it was.
Yeah, there's four.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
Oh, no, New Mexico, Louisiana, local school elections, women could vote. Isn't that interesting? And look over there in the Northeast. Okay, so Maine had presidential. So in the Northeast, right, supposed to be the bedrock of liberalism, only New York had full suffrage, right? In school.
Yeah.
I just thought we could really, that'd be a great map to have for civics and government. It's a great
Good
map.
find.
Okay, thank you.
So I was going to talk about women in labor, but to start, I want to talk about women in education. So these are some statistics. So in 1870, it was estimated that 20% of university students were women, and then in 1900, that estimation rose to 33%, and by the year 1900, 19% of all undergraduate degrees were received by women, and an increased number of women in college would lead to an increased number of women in the workforce. So, in the 19th century, women were needed to fill gaps during the Civil War and to fulfill the imagination and ideas some men did not have. The major jobs women had in the 1800s were in agriculture, especially when the men were away. Women found themselves needing to tend to the livestock and crops to feed their families. Domestic servants. This job allowed young women to be paid for what tasks that they did anyways. They would take care of other people's children, cook, and clean other people's houses. There were factory workers. Many women were hired in factories because they were able to be paid less, because the people who were working in factories felt they didn't need as much money for some reason. And women performed the unskilled jobs such as spinning and weaving, which was a task they commonly did at home. And the last job was teaching. Teaching jobs were only held by young, non-married, native-born women. This was a low-paying job, but was highly valued because it was the only job, or one of the only jobs offered to women. And in 1899, when Theodore Roosevelt was discussing the U.S.'s ventures overseas, he gave the impression that it was only a male workforce, but in reality, women were able to do overseas jobs such as missionaries, teachers, doctors, artists, and writers. And in addition, U.S. looked to economics and culture to expand just as much as they looked to military and political power. And this meant that the U.S. needed women to spread their ideas on American values to other countries because they had greater cultural values.
What slide, Jeff? Okay. Well, we'll just pick it up and finish. So remember where you're at?
Oh, God.
We didn't want to.